Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're so happy to be here with you today and really glad you could join us. You're listening to My Strategy, which are live on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we're going to be talking about the leadership deficit, which leads to bullying in the workplace. This episode, I'm going to be talking about the increasing bullying in the workplace, discuss the impact of the bullies, ways to detect a workplace bully, and then we're going to give you some tips to stop the workplace bullying. Well, again, glad you could be here. Love to take your phone calls later in the show. Studio number is 866-451-1451. And send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. And if you send in an email, you can be entered to win our weekly giveaway. Well, Saturday is a great day of the week to reflect. It's the day that I choose to reflect and think about my strategy. But keep in mind that any time is a great time to be thinking about your strategy. Our show is growing. We're available on iHeart, iTunes, Player FM, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spreaker, and many other digital platforms. So if you miss this episode, you can go find it in the podcast format on one of those digital platforms. You can find me on social media at Hawkins John. That is my Twitter handle. That's Hawkins John. Or you can go to johnmhawkins.com. And just like anything in life, we need to have a strategy and a plan to help us reach our goals, because the best laid plans don't always work. This week I am looking for stories about bullying in the workplace. Do you have a good example? Have you been bullied in the workplace, or perhaps you are the bully? Send me your thoughts to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com, and that too will qualify for entering into the weekly giveaway. All right, we're talking about the leadership deficit which leads to bullying in the workplace. Today we're going to be talking about how there is a leadership crisis and that all of that is leading to additional bullying. We're going to talk a little bit about the direct cost of bullying, the anti-bullying culture, detecting damaging bullies before they cause too much harm. We're then going to talk about leaders who are bullying, but they don't realize it by being condescending, sarcastic, using cliches, being passive-aggressive, or perhaps know-it-all. You might not think that's bullying behavior, but it does qualify. Also going to talk a little bit about signs your boss is really a bully, negative disruption, creating discomfort associated with leeches and loafers. They use authority to create silos. But have no fear, because then we're going to be talking about how to go about stopping these bullies in their track. There's a lot of really good tips in this segment here where we're going to talk about what lets the bullies thrive. There's actually a codependent nature to it. We're going to talk about the truth about what the bully really wants. We're going to talk about the bully rehabilitation plan. And then we are going to come up with our strategy to help us deal with this. All right, so leadership to blame. Is leadership really to blame? I've got an article here by Patrick V. Valton. He's a CEO of Hirebox International. He's got an article here that talks about the impact of bullying. He says more than 72% of the workforce is disengaged, costing the nation's business 450 to 500 billion, that's with a B, revenues annually. This growing concern is often analyzed as a cultural indicator of individualism, or as millennial and generational Z phenomenon of entitlement. That is what people claim the problem to be. But he says one primary and often overlooked source of employee disengagement is unsolved or badly managed bullying in the workplace, which impacts more than 75% of American workers, causing decreased productivity, lower morale, and higher personnel turnover, defined as repeated mistreated of an employee by one or more employees. Workplace bullying is hitting the reputation of U.S. businesses leadership hard. It says here 61% of bullies are bosses. 71% of employer reactions are harmful. So this is the employer reaction that are harmful to the targets versus 60% of the coworkers' reactions. 45% of employees have reported worsening of work relationship in the last 4 years. Now, as reported by business.com, less than 20% of these employers will help a bullied target, leaving 65.6 million victims without any recourse. That's 65.6 million victims in the United States without recourse and who might be bullied. Other than, for 61% of them, leaving their job in order to escape the resulting emotional stress and suffering. So these people are not able to have their situation dealt with at work, and as a result, they just up and quit. In many cases, a perfectly good job. The bully is left at the place of employment, and the victim has to move on. According to 2017 U.S. Workplace Bullying Survey on employers' attitudes and reactions to their organizations, 22% of these organizations never learned about the bully's misconduct. 26% did nothing when the complaint was filed. 46% investigated inappropriately and nothing was changed. 71% showed negative reactions. 23% took action without positive change for the target. 6% took action that resulted in a negative outcome for the perpetrator. As you can see here, based on the numbers, and this is by an article by Patrick V. Valton, that bullying does have an impact. He said direct costs related to bullying. Employers must realize that poor or no action against bullying can have a dramatic impact on the survival of their organization. Bullying targets, they lose 7 to 10 hours per week of work. Targets will lose approximately $8,800 of yearly wages on average. Up to 400 hours of production can be lost due to the target taking sick days or vacation days. Imagine that. You're bullied in an environment, and for whatever reason, the situation's not being addressed. So what do? You call in sick. It means you have to pay the price of the bully who is perpetrating the act. It says 72% of people will leave their job after being bullied or witnessing bullying at work. 9 out of 10 employees will report higher stress level and emotional breakdown in the bullying environment. It says here you would think the turnover, restraining absenteeism, and potential litigation costs would be enough to concern any business owner or executive about workplace bullying, but he says this is not necessarily the case. Approximately 43% of executives believe workplace violence is not an alarming issue, and 67% believe workplace violence does not create a negative impact on their budget. So there we've got two different vantage points, two different viewpoints. Many don't think there is an impact, yet in this study here, it shows that there is an impact. So who is true here? Article goes on to talk about developing the anti-bully culture. I also talk about how to detect damaging bullies before you hire them. And all of that has an impact on businesses and, most importantly, you and your health. And since this is about personal development, we want to get ahead of the situation. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live on the BBM Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about leaders who might be bullying without even realizing it. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Today we're talking about the leadership deficit, which has led to bullying in the workplace. This episode, I'm talking about the increasing bullying in the workplace, the impact of bullies, ways to detect a workplace bully, and giving tips to stop workplace bullies. Love to take your thoughts. Send us an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or later in the show, we'll be taking some phone calls at 866-451-1451. That's 866-451-1451. Right before the break, we were talking about leadership to blame for increasing bullying. It's an article that we were taking some information from by Patrick V. Valton. It's called Lack of Leadership to Blame for Increasing Bullying. In there, he talked about the phenomenon where we are blaming millennials and Generation Zs for these problems of entitlement. But he comes back with an interesting proposition saying that it really isn't about that as much as it is about bullying in the workplace and how it impacts over 75% of American workers, which means over 60 million of us are impacted. In this segment, I want to talk about leaders who bully without realizing it. Is it possible that we have misdiagnosed it, or as a leader, you just don't realize you're bullying? I've got an article here that I'm leaning on from Randy Conley. It's called 6 Ways Leaders Bully Without People Realizing It. He says, in the latest edition of Leaders Behaving Badly, the University of Maryland has placed multiple members of the men's football team staff on administrative leave, including the head coach, DJ Durkin, while the school investigates their role in creating a toxic culture that contributed to the death of offensive lineman Jordan McNair in June after a football workout. It says here that ESPN cited that there is a coaching environment based on fear and intimidation. In one example, a player holding a meal while in a meeting had the other meal slapped out of his hand in front of the team. At other times, small weights or other objects were thrown at the directions of the players. When in strength and conditioning training, the belittling, humiliation, embarrassment of players is common. In one example, a player whom coaches wanted to lose weight was forced to eat candy bars as he was made to watch his other teammates working out. Extreme verbal abuse of player occurs often. Players are routinely the targets of obscenity-laced epithets meant to mock their masculinity when they're unable to complete a workout or weight lift. Coaches have endorsed unhealthy eating habits using food for punishment. For example, a player was forced to eat or overeat to the point of vomiting. He says there's absolutely no room for that kind of behavior in sports, school, or the workplace, and leaders have to be held to a higher standard. I think it's interesting here that while he's highlighted a sporting example, sportsmen who are in a most likely college program that are being bullied, there are subtle things that bosses and employers do, and they might not realize it. In the locker room, that might just be seen as how they go about getting ready for a game or their culture. But in reality, it does have some negative consequences. The author here goes on to saying that bullying is not just verbal or physical intimidation. Bullying can manifest itself in many subtle ways. Any behavior you use to intimidate, dominate, embarrass, harass, or purposely make someone feel inferior could be considered bullying. So the author goes on to give us 6 different examples of what might be construed as bullying, even if you don't think it's bullying. So let's think about these. It says, number 1, you are condescending. When you act in a condescending manner, whether patronizing someone or being dismissive of a person's contributions, or minimizing someone's impact in order to highlight yours, you are sending a message that you believe you are superior to the other person. So you're condescending. And this is interesting because when we think about bullying, or at least when I think about bullying, you think about the schoolyard bully in 4th grade or 5th grade who's pushing around the other kids and taking their lunches. That's at least the way I see it. But what about when you're condescending? Is that really bullying? I know it could make someone's feelings be hurt. And perhaps it is a form of bullying. Let's continue. Wounding with sarcasm. The author says they like sarcastic humor as much as the next person, but there is a difference between sarcasm that highlights the irony of a situation and is self-deprecating versus sarcasm that is intended to belittle and injure another person. There's a very fine line there. I mean, when you're sarcastic, it is easy to, kind of poke fun at ourselves, be a little self-deprecating in that respect, show that we're humble. But there's a fine line between humility and self-deprecation versus saying something that could injure someone else. And we don't know how people take these as well, right? I mean, if you're in a conversation with a group of people and you are sarcastic, nine out of the 10 people in the room might take it one way and one person takes it the other. So what is the reality? I think, if people do interpret it as being negative, then it is negative. Next one, he says, is being cliche. Cliches aren't only for high school. Unfortunately, many adults carry that same behavior into the workplace. Purposely excluding people from activities is a bullying behavior intent to send a message that you're not one of us. This is interesting. Have you ever been out on a work trip and you did not get invited to go out to dinner, or someone did not include you onto the work trip to begin with? They don't invite you to meetings. Well, how cliquey is that? And I might have misspoke. I meant to say cliquish, not cliche. But these cliques basically are ways that you can demonstrate that that others are not part of your group. I didn't think about that one. That's interesting. Number 4, thinking you know it all. Have you ever worked with a person who thinks they know it all? How annoying is that? Much like behaving in a condescending manner, acting like you're the know-it-all expert is a way to intimidate others. I've also found that people who use esoteric references can also be intimidating others. Just interesting how important communication is. Number 5 is being passive-aggressive. Perhaps one of the most subtle forms of bullying and manipulation is passive-aggressive behavior, positioning teams, department, and organizations. Number 6 is gossiping. Have you ever thought of gossiping as a form of bullying? Well, I have not. The author suggests that it could be considered a form of bullying, and some experts even consider it is a form of workplace violence because it's not intended to harm other individuals or groups. Well, those are all very interesting examples. You might not thought that you're bullying, and maybe it's not technically bullying in a physical nature, but it could put people in an uncomfortable position. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about signs your boss is really a bully. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. The show is called My Strategy. Very happy to be here with you today. If you're just joining us today, we're talking about leadership deficits that lead to bullying in the workplace. We're talking about the increasing bullying in the workplace, discussing the impact of the bullies, ways to detect a workplace bully, and I'm giving you tips to stop workplace bullies in their tracks. Right before the break, we were talking about leaders that are bullying without even realizing it. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit about signs your boss is really a bully. What are some of the environments that they're creating, such as negative disruption, creating discomfort, association with leeches and loafers, and using authority to create silos. Got an article here by Glenn Lopez. He is a contributor. Wrote an article called 4 Signs That Bosses Are Really Bullies. He's talking about the political climate in such a way, he says here, that every day we become more confused about what leadership really means, how to detect true leadership when we see it, and how to project it when we have it. For many, being a leader means assuming a role that entitles you to the authority to be irresponsible, entitled, bullied. In fact, politicians on both sides of the aisle hide the fact that they don't know how to effectively lead anyone. Instead, leadership is all about protecting what is mine and by taking away what is yours. That's a pretty strong statement from Glenn here. Obviously he's giving his opinion on the political situation in the United States. He goes on to say that leaders today believe that to survive, they must make it difficult for those who they oppose, and those they lead to have influence and impact. They judge others, reject their ideas sight unseen, because things like compromise, nuance, and collaboration are seen as a sign of weakness. I think that is true in today's political culture specifically. We've stopped talking about the facts. We've stopped talking about the policies. We started talking about our own teams, our own position, and we're forgetting about what really is important. Leaders, in my perspective, whether you're leading the country or an organization, should really be focused on the members of the organization. They should be focusing on what their needs are and helping their members to be successful. Well, this author says that that's not happening, and leadership's now given a bad name, specifically in politics. He says in business it's no different. It used to be an honor, an earned privilege to be a leader. Today, too many leaders use their leadership roles not to lead, but rather to strip others of their identity. They think it makes them look strong, but true strength in today's business environment demands authenticity, inclusion, and vulnerability. He says, as you explore your career, be on the lookout for the following 4 signs that reveal leaders who are bullies looking to strip you of your identity and not allowing you to grow. So number 1, he says, they create negative disruption to support their own hidden agendas. The bullies inflict fear, throw people off guard to ensure environments where they have complete control. They enjoy chaos and throwing a bone now and then because it puts a spotlight of attention on them to satisfy their own overt and hidden agendas. They make it possible for their people to influence by seeming to but not actually caring about those people's or jobs or the people themselves. Just that they are doing what it takes to make their leaders look good. So if you run into situations where you've had a leader who's created negative disruption, I've known leaders like that. You don't want to go to their meetings. You don't want to talk to them. You want to avoid them at all costs because you know that when you do get in that meeting, there is going to be some sort of a tantrum thrown, and people are going to feel fear. They are going to feel stress, and they are not going to be as productive as they can. Number 2, he says, is create discomfort and uncertainty. He said really bad bosses are masters at ensuring that their departments, divisions, and organizations feel uncomfortable or uncertain about the next decision, promotions, or strategic partnerships. The author goes on to talk about a story how when he was early on his career, that he felt that he intimidated a boss of his. And as a result of he feeling that he intimidated the boss did not include him in many of the discussions. If we go back to what we were talking about in the second segment, we're talking about cliquey and not including people. Well, that boss might have technically qualified as using bullying tactics against this author. He says the goal was not to have his back and work with general purpose, but to create an uneasy environment that would limit his ability to perform at the highest level. There's always two sides to every story. While the author sees it one way, if we had the conversation with the boss, it might tell us some other insights. But, the author of this article did feel that way, so technically he might have been bullied. He felt that way, so he was. Associate with leeches and loafers. He says there's 4 types of people in business: leaders, lifters, loafers, and leeches. He says bullies gravitate to the latter two because they are typically jealous people who lack self-confidence, self-trust, and attempt to bring other people down to bring themselves up. They are leeches because they want to use other people's ideas and claim them as their own to advance their own careers. They are loafers because they lack originality and distinction, and thus play off the efforts of those that do. Workplaces do require environments that leverage strengths, uniqueness, and capabilities of people who get it to advance those that don't. Number 4, leverage authority to create silos and polarize people. Leaders who are bullies are smart enough to know their boundaries. They want to know how much they can get away with to ensure their own insecurities aren't revealed. To help define these boundaries, they create them. Bullies love siloed work environments. Division, marginalization, and disconnection only benefit their agendas. Sharing of ideas and ideals, allowing people to live with an entrepreneurial spirit, that threatens their stature and exposes their inability to create relationships that generates momentum, growth, and not just change, but evolution. So those are some ideas from Glenn Lopez, where he says you can identify that your boss really is a bully. How many times have you been in a situation where you feel that you are in a negative environment? There's discomfort and uncertainty. There's leeches and loafers. I think all of these things do apply. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins, coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to stop these bullies right in their tracks. You're not going to want to miss this. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm John M. Hawkins. You're coming to you live from the PBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. The show is My Strategy. And if you're just joining us, welcome. So happy to have you here today, and I'm glad to be here. My Strategy episodes are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. If you are just joining us, we're talking about the leadership deficit, which leads to bullying in the workplace. We've been talking about the increased bullying in the workplace, talking about the impact of those bullies, ways to detect a workplace bully, and we're giving tips to stop workplace bullies in their tracks. We'd love to get your thoughts. Do you have an example of workplace bullying, or perhaps are you a workplace bullying, or perhaps a recovering workplace bully? Well, after the prior two segments where we talked about some of the bullying tactics when we don't realize it, there might be times when we all could be accused of some form of bullying or another. In this segment, I want to talk about how to stop these bullies in their tracks. I've got an article here by Christine Comaford. It's called How to Stop Workplace Bullies in Their Tracks. So it says here, the VP of Finance constantly interrupts and actively prevents others from speaking in the meeting. He scoffs when they share ideas and make suggestions. The managing director at a financial firm publicly trashes another director's new strategy, tearing it apart without having the domain expertise to understand what she is saying. The lead engineer makes snide remarks about the product development process during the team meetings and publicly denounces the marketing team. What do these three have in common? So we've got the VP of Finance, the managing director, and the lead engineer. Well, she says they're all bullies. Bullies are scary, shocking, embarrassing, and far too often tolerated in the workplace. But why are they tolerated? Because we don't have to deal with them. We don't want to have to deal with them. We don't want the attack, the conflict, the discomfort. So we either pretend they aren't wreaking havoc or we grit our teeth and tolerate them. Well, how true is that? How many times have you witnessed bullying behavior in the workplace? I know I have. And how many times have you reported that to someone? Or how many times have you confronted the bully and let them know about their behavior? Or have you just done nothing? I think it's easy to do nothing. So the author then goes on to talk about how Paul was being a bully. Now, Paul is the COO of the Consumer Packaged Goods Company and manages the VP of Finance, who was the bully, as mentioned above. So during coaching, Paul realized how he tolerates and even allows this unacceptable behavior. So could it be the boss's boss who is enabling this behavior? She says, how is he doing this? So she said, he lets inappropriate conduct occur in the meeting. When Paul could stop the bullying from constantly interrupting and preventing others from speaking, Paul must clarify what appropriate meeting etiquette specifically is and ensure it is honored. Well, that's a simple way to stop it. Have rules in place. You know, there were Robert's Rules of Orders, which defined how a meeting should be conducted. Maybe one could go back to a form of that. He acts as a go-between when the bully refuses to interact with people he thinks are stupid, when Paul could make it clear to both parties that they need to work things out together. He holds his anger in and comprises his integrity, when Paul could just deal with this issue directly. Modeling leadership for his team and showing them a safe, respectful, collaborative work environment is required of the company. He lets others vent to him about the bully instead of creating an opportunity to let disgruntled parties communicate their grievances directly and interface with HR. Well, that's interesting. He is listening. He's hearing the venting. But is Paul really the appropriate person to do anything about this? Well, I think he needs to escalate and bring HR in. You know, HR can be your coach and can help you with situations like this. That's what they're trained to do. She says here we avoid all uncomfortable human relations issues sometimes. But what is the cost? Exorbitant, she says, as we daily give away our power, comprise our integrity, and inadvertently teach our team that bullying is acceptable. She then talks a little bit about what the bullies want. She says here that person X will put down others, make them feel small, condescends, because inside they don't feel something. What is that something? We don't know. You'd have to get inside the bully's head. Person Y spreads fears, rumors, negative gossip because inside they don't feel blank. What is it they don't feel? Person Z talks about inequality, unfairness, and how others get special treatment because inside they don't feel something. I know we had a show about self-esteem, self-worth. Maybe that is something that the bully could work on. They don't have that self-esteem. They don't have that self-worth. And as a result, they're creating situations where they feel important, where they feel that they matter. Could be part of it. She then goes on to talk about how we can stop these bullies in their tracks by putting together a bully rehab plan. So number one, we need to identify how you are enabling the bully's behavior. And you need to end the enabling system. She says the bully is generally playing the persecutor role, which creates a need for a rescuer to protect the victim. Then the train has left the proverbial station and we're zooming ahead on a ride to a place where we don't want to go. So now she's starting to create these different roles where we've got the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer. She says rather than have the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer, instead of a persecutor, have an action creator. Instead of a victim, have an outcome creator. And instead of a rescuer, have an insight creator. So we can change how we think, how we approach these situations, and we can actually reduce the impact of the bully. She says, number one, what would you like? Outcome they desire as they can create and maintain. What will having that do for you? How will they feel? The benefits. How will you know when you have it? Proof, criteria that will be present. And these are things that she's saying we should ask the bully. Where, when, with whom do you want this? What might of value do you have to risk to get this? And is it okay and acceptable to have this as an outcome? And what are the next steps? So what she's essentially saying is that we need to turn this around on the bully and perhaps get some additional information from the bully so that we can understand exactly what is it about them that has them act in that specific way. And when you do that and turn the script, it can actually help you confront the bully in a strategic way. You're listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about how we can set up a system with healthy boundaries to stop those bullies. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. You're listening to My Strategy. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. We're very happy to have you here today. Right before the break, we started talking about how to stop bullies in their tracks. In this segment, I want to continue talking about how to stop those bullies in their tracks. And also, we're going to talk about creating your strategy. Before the break, we were talking about, changing the paradigm, not being an enabler, but, helping to help the bully through their own issues by shifting from problem focus to outcome focus, where we went from persecutor, victim, rescuer to action creator, outcome creator, and insight creator. Now, I can tell you this is not an easy process, especially if you are feeling stressed, fearful, and ready to quit your job. But I can tell you that if you leave this job and move on to another one, and you've not developed the skill to solve this particular challenge with the bully, this problem could rear its head in the future, and you'll be faced with a similar dilemma. Do you quit the job and move on, or do you develop that skill at that point? So in this situation, we're leaning on an article by Christine Comaford, and she was giving us some ideas of things we could ask the bully to figure out what outcome would they want. And she goes on to talk about, asking various questions of the bully and asking them as often as you can, what is the outcome they want? What is it that they want to get from their interactions as opposed to focusing on their behaviors? Because if you start to shift to an outcome-based perspective or framework, using that as the guiding principle, the goal, then that's going to help you focus on outcomes as opposed to treating people poorly. She says you need to set up a new system with healthy boundaries and behaviors, rich with safety, belonging, mattering, and shifting from tension to empowerment. She's got an absolutely, what I think, brilliant point here. Imagine that you're being bullied. She says, note that if a bully is above you on the organizational chart, so it's your boss, then you need a mentor equal or greater in stature to the bully to do the following. So I think this is important because many times as employees, we talk to our peers. And we talk to our peers about situations. The challenge is that the peer could potentially be in the same situation you are in. And so she suggests that you find a mentor in the organizational chart who is a peer or greater. So it's either a peer to your boss or your boss's boss's peer. She says you need to change it by, number one, setting the stage. Explain why you're meeting and the outcome you want to form a collaborative turnaround plan. Number two, state observable data and behavior. This is where you describe specific behaviors that must change and examples so the bully can step into the past scenarios and understand it. Describe the impact, the damage that these behaviors are doing to others, the company, and the bully themselves. Check problem acknowledgement. Do they agree that there is a problem? Do they see this problem must now end? Then co-create a plan. Set a time period, 30, 60 days, where you'll meet weekly for 15 to 30 minutes to track their progress on realizing the challenging behaviors identified above. Make the plan very specific in terms of what you need to see and when you'll know you got the outcome you wanted. If the turnaround doesn't occur, clearly state what the consequences will be. For example, lose job, etc. Check the understanding. Is everything clear? Anything else we need to cover? Reiterate desires for a positive resolution so the consequences become irrelevant. And then build small agreements. Launch the plan and commit to ending the conflict once and for all. Be sure to track it frequently and make sure all concerned see the behavior change too. I think this is important. This talks, what she's talking about here really is what we do on a weekly basis with personal development and trying to build a strategic plan. She wants us to start small. She wants us to have clear communication. She wants us to set the outcomes, measure them. What data can we use to measure it? How do we describe the impact? How do we make sure that we're working on the right problem? Do we have a plan in place? I think many times as we start thinking about building a strategy or thinking about how we're going to go about solving a problem, it comes down to what I like to refer to as my 5-step program, which is awareness. What is it we're trying to accomplish, or what have we become aware that we need to work on from a problem statement perspective? Once we've done that, how do we assess and analyze the situation? If it's a vision, if it's a goal, if something we're trying to aspire to do, we want to start thinking about how are we going to go about getting there. We need to figure out where we are in our current state and what are the things we can start working on. Once we've got that, it's to strategize and plan. You know where you want to go. You know where you are today. So how do you go about coming up with those courses of actions, your strategy? What will that look like in the form of a plan? What are the milestones? What are the objectives? How will all of that fit in? What are some of the tactics that you can use to help get you further down your path? And then, of course, once we've got all of our strategy done, which many people like to do, the planning portion, the hard part comes where you have to implement it. And implementing a plan doesn't mean that it's going to work 100% the first time. It means that you're going to have actions that do work. You're going to have tactics that move you forward, that you take and move you forward. You have other tactics that you're going to take, and the tactics are the visible things that you're doing, which are going to take you farther back. The key, though, is to have the 5th step, which is support and evaluation. If things aren't working, why aren't they working? Who do we talk to? Who do we get from a coaching perspective that can help us? And I thought, one of the things in this article on how to stop workplace bullies in their tracks by Christine Comaford is pretty brilliant. Many times if you're trying to solve a problem, you're talking to peers or you're talking to anybody who will listen. But anybody who will listen might not be the right person to help you achieve those goals. In this case with the bullying, if you have a boss who's a bully, somebody you directly report to, would you have thought, the first reaction would go to talk to your peers? But your peers could be in the exact same position. In this case, you needed to find that mentor that was a peer to the bully or greater. I know many times these are difficult things that we need to talk about, but it is important for us to get to the bottom of it. You're listening to My Strategy. I am your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. When we come back, we're going to talk about putting your plan in place. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. We're coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. The show is My Strategy. Very happy to be here with you today. Our shows are live and on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Today we've been talking about leadership deficit leads to bullying in the workplace. In this episode, we've been talking about the increasing bullying in the workplace. We talked about the impact of bullies, ways to detect a workplace bully, and we just went through the tips to stop workplace bullying in its tracks. Now, if you did miss this broadcast and would like to hear it again, you can go to iHeartRadio, Apple iTunes, or any one of the other digital platforms that the show is replayed on. If you'd like to have something covered in the show, you can send an email to talk@johnmhawkins.com. That's talk@johnmhawkins.com. Or you can give us a phone call at 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. That's 1-844-MY-STRATEGY. Well, today we've been talking about bullying in the workplace and how leaders are potentially responsible for this increase bullying. In this show, we've talked about how there's a leadership crisis, that there is actually a higher cost of bullying than we might suspect. In fact, we learned that over 60 million people are being impacted and bullied in one way or another. And many times, none of this goes reported. It goes unreported, which means that nothing's going to get done. Additionally, those who are the targets of the bullying, many of them choose to leave their employer, to move on to a different company. And we know that there is a very high cost to bringing on new employees and to training and educating them. So these bullies are actually wreaking havoc in many organizations. And not only that, but they're not treating people fairly. They're leading to additional stress. They're leading to turnover. They're leading to people who are not able to feel fulfilled in their positions. Sometimes leaders, though, are doing that bullying without realizing it. They're condescending. They're sarcastic. They create cliques. They're passive-aggressive, or they know it all. And sometimes, as a leader, they might feel that they've got a strong suit. They've got a good sense of humor or sarcastic, and they just don't realize that people are interpreting it in a certain way. We also talked a little bit about signs that your boss is really a bully, where they're creating these conditions where you're getting negative disruption. There's discomfort. They're associating with people who are leeches and loafers. They're trying to create authority by creating silos in the organization. So these are all signs that you can look at, visual signs that tell you if you are in a bullying situation or not. And I can imagine, how terrible it would be for a person who is bullied to be in this situation. You're going to feel like you don't have a choice, that perhaps you don't have self-esteem, you don't feel good enough, you don't feel like, you can do things right. You could turn to negative things that are going to impact your health because of this. This is something that is absolutely serious and needs to be addressed. And so, from that perspective, we really need to start thinking about how do we create these anti-bullying cultures. And what was exciting in this show for me to read about was an article by Christine on how to stop bullies in their track. She was talking about how we might be letting bullies thrive and then switching it from, what the bully wants to figure out exactly what outcome they are trying to get to. And not all bullies are mean bullies, but they can be rehabilitated. And she talks about how we can put together a rehabilitation plan. Also, she gave some good advice that if we're being bullied by a leader or somebody who is above us, that what we need to do is we need to find a peer who is at the same level as the bully. And it all comes down to building a strategy, breaking those old habits that we have. And to break those habits, we need to be aware of the patterns and finally consciously prioritize and commit to those goals. And as always, a little bit of coaching can help you with clarity. Well, you've been listening to My Strategy. I'm your host, John M. Hawkins. Really enjoyed being here with you today, and we'll see you next time.